Could you even imagine a millionaire bringing a homeless woman to his ex-wife's wedding? It sounds utterly inconceivable, and yet, the two of them actually ended up tying the knot in the end. Feel free to follow along and leave your thoughts in the comments. But first, let me tell you this story. I was huddled beside a trash can on Manhattan's 5th Avenue, my fingers numb with cold. Just as I grabbed a half-eaten slice of cheese pizza someone had tossed away, the sound of an engine shutting off rumbled behind me. It wasn't the usual taxi you'd see on the street. This was a deep, low growl that vibrated right through your chest. Later I'd learn it was the V12 engine of a Maybach. I didn't turn around. A car that fancy had nothing to do with me. All I cared about was whether the pizza was covered in too much grime. That is, until a pair of Oxford shoes shined so brightly they reflected my ragged appearance stopped right in front of me. The cuffs of the black suit pants above them were crisp, not a single wrinkle in sight. "Look up." The man's voice was colder than the winter wind. I hesitated for a moment, then lifted my head. He stood backlit, so tall he blocked the trash can behind me. His face was expressionless, with a sharp, prominent nose and lips as thin and cold as a blade. A silk handkerchief peeked out of his left breast pocket, the brand I'd seen in a department store window, Brunello Cucinelli. A single handkerchief like that could have paid for half a month's stay at the shelter. $500 to come with me to a wedding, he said, cutting straight to the chase. A platinum ring on his right index finger glinted, momentarily blinding me. "Get in the car now. It'll be over in 2 hours, and I'll pay you on the spot." I stared into his eyes, too wary to agree right away. New York had all kinds of creeps. Just last month in Brooklyn, I'd seen someone offer $200 to trick a homeless girl into going to a remote warehouse. When the police showed up, her arm was covered in bruises. "I'm not going anywhere out of the way," I said, tucking the pizza into my chest. My voice was hoarse, no surprise, after days of wind chapping my throat, "and I'm not doing anything else. Just being your date?" He raised an eyebrow, as if he hadn't expected me to negotiate. After a 2-second pause, he nodded. "The wedding's at an estate in the Hamptons. All you need to do is stand next to me. Don't speak. Don't cause trouble." I felt the 2 coins left in my pocket, then glanced at the sun sinking fast on the horizon. The shelter would definitely be full tonight. At -5 degrees, spending the night on the street would probably leave me frozen stiff. "Deal," I said, standing up and brushing the dirt off my pants. "But I need to eat this pizza first. I haven't had anything all day." He said nothing, just turned and walked toward the car. When he reached the passenger side, he paused and pulled open the door. "Eat in the car. There's heat." I hesitated, then climbed in. The leather seat was so soft I sank into it, and the warmth of the heater wrapped around me, carrying a faint scent of cedar on, ironic contrast to the rank smell of my clothes. I didn't dare sit all the way back. I set the pizza on my lap and nibbled at it slowly, careful not to drop any crumbs. He sat in the driver's seat, not looking at me. His fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. "My name's Grayson Bell. The wedding's my ex-wife's." I froze mid-bite. So he wasn't a creep, just a man looking for a pawn to piss off his ex. I had seen this kind of drama on TV, but never thought I'd actually live it. "Lexi," I said, giving him only my first name. For someone living on the streets, there was no point in sharing more. He grunted in acknowledgement and started the car. The ride was smooth, and the skyscrapers outside gradually gave way to suburban woods. After finishing the pizza, I wiped my mouth discreetly and leaned against the window to watch the scenery. I'd actually been to the Hamptons before, back when my dad was alive. He'd taken me to a friend's party there. But then, "We're here," Grayson's voice cut through my thoughts. The car stopped in front of a white estate. Pink balloons strung above the entrance. A wedding tent had been set up on the lawn in the distance, filled with people, informal wear people, who looked nothing like me. I hesitated to get out, my hand clutching the door handle, palms sweating. Grayson glanced at me, then grabbed a paper bag from the back seat. "There's a dress in here. Go change in the restroom over there. Be back in 10 minutes. I took the bag. The fabric inside felt soft. When I opened it, I found a red slip dress made of silk so expensive, it made my breath catch. I looked up to tell him it wasn't right for me, but he'd already gotten out of the car and was leaning against it, smoking. His profile was sharp and cold, and he didn't spare me another glance. Reluctantly, I carried the bag to the nearby restroom. In the mirror, my hair was a tangled mess, my face smudged with dirt, and dark circles hung under my eyes. I looked nothing like someone who deserved a dress like this, but I changed anyway. It fit perfectly, hitting just above the knees, though the straps were a little loose, so I tightened them with a rubber band I found in my pocket. When I stepped out, Grayson was on the phone. He froze when he saw me, even forgetting to stub out his cigarette. I fidgeted under his gaze, pulling my arms close to my chest. "Is it too weird?" He said nothing, just hung up the phone and walked over. From his pocket, he pulled out a tube of lipstick, a bright, true red. "Put this on." I didn't take it. I'd never worn anything this expensive in my life. Put it on, he said, his tone firm as he pressed the lipstick into my hand. Don't make me regret bringing you here. I bit my lip, twisted open the tube, and applied it using the car window as a mirror. My hands were shaking so much I went outside the lip line. I quickly blotted it with my fingertip. When I turned around, Grayson was watching me on for a split second. His eyes looked softer, but the coldness returned just as fast. Let's go, he said, offering his arm. He didn't touch me, just made a gesture for me to loop mine through his. I hesitated, then slid my arm gently through his. His arm was solid, and I could feel warmth through his suit, nothing like the man himself. The wedding hadn't started yet. Guests were mingling on the lawn, holding drinks. The moment we walked in, every eye turned to us. I instinctively tried to shrink behind Grayson, but he tightened his grip on my arm and whispered, "Hold your head up, don't act like a mouse." I gritted my teeth and straightened my back. I knew what they were staring at, the red dress that looked so out of place, the canvas shoes I still had on, the absurd contrast between Grayson and me. It was like watching a ridiculous play, and I was the most laughable actor. "Grayson!" A woman in a white wedding dress approached, smiling sweetly, but her eyes flicked over me like she was appraising a cheap trinket. It was his ex-wife, Lena. Grayson had mentioned her briefly in the car, said she'd married a real estate tycoon, even richer than him. Lena's dress was dotted with tiny diamonds that glinted in the sun, making my eyes ache. She reached out as if to touch Grayson's arm, but when she saw my hand loop through his, she pulled back. Instead, she fixed her gaze on my dress. "Your dress is quite unique, miss. Which designer made it?" "I don't think I've seen it before." I heard the barb in her words. She was calling my dress a no-name knockoff, not fit for the occasion. Before I could respond, Grayson spoke up. "It's custom-made, never been publicly released." His tone was flat, but he emphasized the words custom-made. "Lexi, this is Lena, my ex-wife." Lena's smile faltered for a moment, and the champagne flute in her hand wobbled, spilling a little onto the lawn. She recovered quickly, but her eyes turned cold. "So this is Miss Lexi. You look very young. Grayson, is this the type you like now?" "None of your business," Grayson said, pulling me away. I could feel Lena's gaze boring into my back like needles. When we reached the corner of the terrace, Grayson let go of my arm and took a glass of juice from a waiter, handing it to me. "Don't drink champagne. You won't be able to handle it." I took the glass. My fingers brushed the cold rim. "Why did you bring me?" I asked. Wouldn't a proper date have been better at pissing her off? He leaned against the railing, staring out at the ocean. After a moment of silence, he said, "A proper date would ask a million questions. You won't." I froze. So that's why he thought I was low maintenance. A homeless woman who'd keep her mouth shut for money. Far easier than the socialites who cooed and made demands. "You're right," I said, forcing a smile and taking a sip of the juice. It was sickeningly sweet. "All I want is the money. I don't care about anything else." He turned to look at me, his eyebrows furrowing as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. Just then, the wedding march started, and everyone headed toward the church. Lena linked arms with her new husband, resting her head on his shoulder, looking perfectly happy. Grayson didn't move, still leaning against the railing. "Aren't you going to watch?" I asked. "No point," he said, pulling out a pack of cigarettes. He started to light one, then thought better of it and tucked the pack back in his pocket. "Stay with me for a while." I couldn't tell if he truly didn't want to watch or if he was afraid to. I didn't ask. I just stood with him in the corner. The wind blew in off the ocean, carrying a salty chill. I wrapped my arms around myself instinctively, and Grayson noticed. He took off his suit jacket and held it out to me. "Put this on." "No, it'll get dirty," I said. My clothes were so grimy, and his jacket was obviously expensive. "I told you to put it on," he said, his tone sharp again. He draped the jacket over my shoulders and even adjusted the collar for me. His touch was light, nothing like his usual coldness. Wrapped in his jacket, I breathed in the mix of cedar and tobacco. It was warmer than the blankets at the shelter. I snuck a glance at him. He was staring at the ocean. His profile softer than before, less icy. "Did you love her a lot?" I couldn't help but ask. He paused, his voice quieter. "Enough to want to give her half my company's shares. Turns out she thought I was too busy, so she ran off with someone else." I said nothing. I didn't understand this kind of wealthy people's love. All I knew was that if someone offered me a hot meal, I'd be grateful. After a while, the wedding ended, and the guests erupted into applause. Lena and her husband walked out, waving to everyone. Grayson turned and took my hand, heading for the parking lot. "Let's go." His hand was warm, with calluses on his palm, and he held mine tightly, as if he was afraid I'd run away. I followed him through the crowd. When Lena saw us, she called out, "Grayson, won't you stay for dinner?" He didn't look back, just pulled me along faster. Once we were in the car, he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he took $500 from his wallet and handed it to me. Like we agreed. I took the money, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my pocket. A hollow feeling settled in my chest. "Thank you," I said. He grunted and started the car. "Where do you live? I'll drive you back." I froze. His offer caught me off guard. "No, it's fine. I can get back on my own." I didn't want him to know I lived in a shelter. It was too humiliating. "Give me the address," he said, not looking at me, his tone non-negotiable. Reluctantly, I told him the address of the shelter, a run-down warehouse in Brooklyn, dirty and chaotic, a world away from the Hamptons estate. It took over 40 minutes to drive there. When we pulled up, several police cars were parked outside, and a few homeless people were arguing near the entrance. "Stop here," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and reaching to return his suit jacket. "Keep it," he said, "it's cold out." I hesitated, clutching the jacket as I pushed open the door. "Thank you." He said nothing, just watched me. I got out and walked toward the shelter, but after a few steps, I glanced back. His car was still there, its headlights on like a pair of eyes, fixed on me. I hurried inside. The next day, I used the money Grayson had given me to buy some food and a cheap jacket. I washed his suit jacket and folded it neatly. Tucking it into my bag, it was now the only valuable thing I owned. I was back to rummaging through trash cans on Fifth Avenue, just like usual, when I spotted a familiar Maybach parked by the curb. The window rolled down, and there was Grayson. "Get in," he said. I froze and walked over. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he said, opening the passenger door. "Get in." I hesitated, then climbed in. "Why?" "I need you to come with me somewhere," he said, starting the car and heading toward downtown. I didn't ask any more questions. After all, he wasn't going to hurt me. When we pulled up in front of Saks Fifth Avenue, he stopped the car. "Come inside with me." "What for?" I panicked. I'd never set foot in a place like this, and the doorman was already eyeing me suspiciously. "To buy you clothes," he said, taking my hand and leading me inside. The doorman moved to stop us, but Grayson pulled out a black card and flashed it. The doorman stepped aside immediately. Inside, the store was so bright, it made my eyes water. Wall-to-wall luxury goods, each piece costing more than I could live on for half a year. I clung tightly to Grayson's hand, my palms sweating. "Don't be scared. I'm here," he whispered, squeezing my hand harder. We reached the women's section, and a sales clerk approached, smiling brightly. "Mr. Bell, welcome back. What can I do for you today?" "Pick out some outfits for her: dresses, jeans, sweaters, and shoes too. Oh, and a bag," Grayson said, nodding at me. The sales clerk's gaze flicked over me, from my shabby jacket to my canvas shoes. Her smile stiffened, but she nodded anyway. "Of course, Mr. Bell, right this way." She picked out dozens of pieces, old designer labels, all outrageously expensive. When I tried them on, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Clean clothes made me look like I wasn't a homeless person at all. After I finished trying on the last outfit, Grayson was sitting on a couch. When he saw me walk out, his eyes lit up. "That's all. Wrap it up. It's too much." "I won't use half of this," I said quickly. The total must have been tens of thousands of dollars. I couldn't accept this. "Just take it," he said, pulling out his black card and handing it to the clerk. "Also, open a secondary card for her. No spending limit." I was stunned. A secondary card, no limit. It sounded like a fairy tale. "I can't take this, Grayson. It's too much." He stood up and walked over, pressing the card into my hand. "Take it, and stop digging through trash cans for food." "Why are you being so nice to me?" I had to ask. "We'd only had a business deal. He didn't owe me this." He paused, his expression complicated. "I don't know. I just don't want to see you like that anymore." I said nothing. The card in my hand felt burning hot. The clerk finished wrapping the clothes and handed them to me, so many bags I could barely carry them. Grayson took them from me and put them in the car. Once we were back in the car, he said, "I found you an apartment in Manhattan, not far from my office. You can stay there for now." An apartment. I was even more shocked. "Grayson, what are you really up to?" "Nothing," he said. "I just don't think you should live in a shelter." He started the car. "I already left the key by the door. I'll text you the address." I stared at him, my heart a mix of warmth and panic. Warmth, because no one had ever been this kind to me. Panic, because I was afraid this was all a dream, and when I woke up, I'd still be Lexi, the homeless girl. The car pulled up in front of a luxury apartment building, with a doorman at the entrance. Grayson handed me the clothes. "Go on up. Call me if you need anything." He gave me a new phone, with his number already saved in it. "Grayson," I said, hugging the clothes to my chest and looking at him. "Do you like me?" He froze, then smiled, a faint, rare smile. "I don't know. Maybe." I said nothing, just turned and walked into the building. The doorman held the door open for me. I found my apartment and unlocked it with the key. It was spacious, tastefully decorated, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. There was even a large wardrobe perfect for all the new clothes. I walked to the window and looked down at the bustling street below, clutching the secondary card and the phone. Suddenly, I burst into tears. I'd never dreamed I'd have a life like this. In the days that followed, Grayson came to see me every day. Sometimes he took me to nice restaurants, sometimes to the movies. Sometimes we just stayed in the apartment and watched TV. Gradually, I learned about his past. He'd grown up poor. His dad was an alcoholic. His mom had run off when he was young. He'd worked his way through college by taking multiple jobs, then started a tech company that slowly grew into a success, making him a millionaire. He'd met Lena in college. She was a rich heiress, and her family had opposed their relationship. But once his company took off, Lena complained he was too busy to absent-hand, left him for someone else. I was so stupid back then, Grayson said, sitting on the couch with a glass of red wine, his tone self-deprecating. I thought if I had enough money, I could keep her. Turns out I couldn't. I leaned my head on his shoulder and said softly, it wasn't stupidity. She just didn't know how to appreciate you. He turned to look at me, his eyes gentle. Lexi, I'm so glad I met you. I smiled and said nothing. Truth was, I was even more glad I'd met him. Without him, I'd still be living on the streets, wondering if I'd survive the winter. One day, Grayson took me to meet his friends, all wealthy people, at a private club. They looked at me with curiosity. Not the hostility Lena had shown, but curiosity all the same. Grayson, this is the girl you've been talking about? A man named Jack walked over and clapped Grayson on the shoulder. She's beautiful. A bit naive, though. She's not naive, Grayson said, stepping protectively in front of me, his tone cold. She's kind. Jack laughed and dropped the subject, handing me a glass of juice. Miss Lexi, don't take it the wrong way. We're just curious. It's fine, I said, taking the juice and smiling. That night, we stayed late. Grayson drove me home, and in the car he said, Lexi, I want to be with you. For real. My heart raced. Are you sure? I used to be homeless. We're from two different worlds. I don't care about your past, he said, taking my hand. I only care about your future, and I want to give you a home. I looked into his eyes. They were sincere, no trace of deceit. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Okay. From that day on, we were officially together. Grayson added my name to his house deed and his company's shares. He even took me to meet his grandma, his only remaining family. She was a kind old woman who held my hand and told me I was a good girl, urging Grayson to treat me well. I thought my life would stay this happy forever until Lena showed up again. One day, I was waiting for Grayson to finish work at his company when a woman in a red dress walked over. It was Lena. She looked even more beautiful than at the wedding, her hair styled in big waves, bright red lipstick on her lips. Miss Lexi, long time no see, she said, smiling, but her eyes were cold. Miss Lena, do you need something? I stood up, my heart racing. Nothing much, she said, stepping closer and sizing me up. You're living quite the life now, luxury house, fancy car, even a share of Grayson's company. Quite the rags to riches story, huh? Grayson and I love each other, I said, balling my hands into fists and forcing my voice to stay calm. Love each other. She laughed loudly, drawing the attention of people around us. Don't be naive, Grayson's just bored. Once he gets tired of you, you'll be right back to digging through trash cans for food. That's a lie. I couldn't help but snap. Am I? Lena sneered, pulling a photo out of her bag and shoving it at me. Look, this is Grayson and me having dinner last month. He told me he's only with you to get back at me, double quotes. I took the photo. It was definitely Grayson and Lena, sitting across from each other at a restaurant, Grayson smiling broadly. My heart plummeted, like I'd been thrown into an ice cellar. That's impossible. Grayson wouldn't lie to me, I said, my voice shaking. Wouldn't he? Lena laughed coldly. He never lied to me either, and look how that turned out. Lexi, you and him are from different worlds. He'll leave you eventually. Lena walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching the photo. Tears fell onto the picture, blurring Grayson's face. When Grayson came out of his office and saw me crying, he rushed over. Lexi, what's wrong? Who hurt you? I held out the photo, my voice breaking. What is this? You had dinner with Lena last month. Why didn't you tell me? Is it true you're only with me to get back at her? When he saw the photo, his face paled. Lexi, let me explain. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. Tell me. Lena asked me out. She said she wasn't happy and wanted to get back together. I refused, her made clear we were over. I didn't tell you because I thought it was pointless. And I didn't want you to misunderstand, he said, grabbing my hand, his voice urgent. Lexi, I only love you. I never thought about leaving you. I don't believe you. I pulled my hand away. Lena said you're only with me to get back at her. Do you think I'm a burden? That you'll abandon me eventually? I don't. Grayson raised his voice. Lexi, can you stop being so unreasonable? I've done so much for you. How can you not trust me? Unreasonable. I laughed through my tears. So that's what I am too. You unreasonable Grayson. I used to be homeless. I'm not good enough for you. I'll leave happy now. I turned to walk toward the door, but Grayson grabbed me. Lexi, don't go. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have met with Lena without telling you. Forgive me, please. I need to be alone, I said, pulling my hand free and running out of the company. I wandered the streets aimlessly, just like before, except now I was wearing expensive clothes and carrying a designer bag, feeling even more disheveled than when I was homeless. I didn't know where to go. The apartment was Grayson's. The secondary card was his. I had nothing. Without him, I was still Lexi, the girl with nothing. I walked to the shelter where I used to live. It was still dirty and chaotic, with a few homeless people drinking near the entrance. I wanted to go in, but I couldn't hide. Gotten used to the life Grayson had given me, and I couldn't go back. Just then, my phone rang. It was Grayson, but I didn't answer. I turned the phone off. I wandered the streets all night. The next morning I stopped outside a cafe and saw a news report playing on the TV. Inside, Grayson's company was in trouble, its stock plummeting. Apparently, someone had leaked confidential information. My heart dropped. I quickly turned my phone back on. There were dozens of missed calls and texts from Grayson, and one from his grandma Lexi. Grayson's going crazy looking for you. His company's in big trouble, please come back. I hailed a taxi and rushed to Grayson's company. Reporters and police were swarming outside. I pushed through the crowd and found Grayson sitting in his office, his hair a mess. His eyes bloodshot, all the confidence he usually exuded was gone. Grayson. I ran over and grabbed his hand. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. He pulled me into a tight hug. Lexi, you're back. I thought I'd lost you forever. How could I leave you? I hugged him back, tears falling. What happened to the company? What's going on? Lena did this, Grayson said, his voice hoarse. She wanted revenge, so she teamed up with our competitor and leaked our confidential data. Now the company's on the verge of bankruptcy. I froze. I never thought Lena could be so cruel. What do we do now? What else can we do? He gave a bitter laugh. File for bankruptcy. Actually, maybe it's for the best. I used to care too much about money, ignored the people around me. Now that I've lost everything, I finally know what's really important. You still have me, I said, squeezing his hand. No matter if you're rich or poor, I'll stay with you. He looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. Lexi, I'm sorry. I was terrible to you before, snapping at you, making you doubt me. I'll never do that again. Don't apologize. We'll get through this together, I said. In the days that followed, we worked together to settle the company's affairs. We sold the house and the cars, paid off the debts, and were left with only a small apartment. Life was hard. We had to squeeze into the subway to get to work, eat cheap fast food for every meal, but I was happy because we were together. One day, we were grocery shopping when we ran into Lena. She looked haggard, her designer clothes replaced with cheap jeans, her hair unkempt. She was a shadow of her former self. Grayson, Lexi, she said, her voice hoarse. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I know I was wrong. Grayson said nothing, just took my hand and kept walking. Grayson, can you forgive me? Lena chased after us, reaching for Grayson's arm. Leave us alone, I said, stepping in front of Grayson, my tone firm. You hurt him, and you hurt me. We'll never forgive you. Lena looked at me, tears falling. I know I was wrong, but I'm so regretful now. I've lost everything, even my husband. He left me when he found out what I did. You got what you deserved. Grayson finally spoke, his tone flat. Don't come looking for us again. We turned and walked away, never looking back. Lena's sobs echoed behind us, but I felt no sympathy. She'd been ruthless before this, was just the consequence of her actions. A year later, Grayson got a job as a software engineer. It didn't pay as much as running his own company, but it was enough to support us. I found a job as a waitress at a restaurant. Every night after work, we'd cook dinner together, watch TV, take walks, simple, ordinary moments, but full of happiness. One day, we were walking in Central Park when we saw a newlywed couple taking wedding photos. The bride was in a white dress, the groom in a black suit, both smiling brightly. Grayson, I said, pulling on his hand, when are we going to take wedding photos? He froze, then smiled. Whenever you want, as long as you're ready. I'm ready, I said. He pulled a small box out of his pocket and opened it. Inside was a silver ring, simple, no diamonds, but shiny. Lexi, I bought this with my first paycheck. It's not expensive, but I hope you like it. I took the ring and slipped it on my finger. It fit perfectly. I love it. It's the best gift I've ever gotten. He hugged me, whispering in my ear, Lexi, thank you for staying with me when I had nothing. You made me realize that happiness isn't about money. It's about having you by my side. And thank you, I said, leaning my head on his chest. You pulled me off the streets and gave me a home. The wind blew, carrying the scent of spring. I looked at the sunset in the distance, my heart full of happiness. No matter who you were, no matter how much suffering you'd endured, if you met the right person, you could find happiness. I had once been a homeless girl, rummaging for food on the street in -5-degree weather, thinking I'd never have a chance to turn my life around. He'd once been a millionaire, attending his ex-wife's wedding at a Hampton's estate, thinking money could buy anything. We'd been from two different worlds, but a chance deal had brought us together. Now, we had no mansion, no luxury cars, no endless money, but we had each other, a warm home, and ordinary happiness. And that was more than enough. Sometimes I'd wonder, what if I hadn't agreed to his deal that day? What if I hadn't gone to the wedding in the Hamptons? What would my life be like? I'd probably still be living on the streets, maybe even frozen to death one winter night. For that, I was grateful. I'd said yes, grateful I'd met him, grateful we'd made it this far together. The road ahead was long, and there would be more hardships, but I wasn't afraid, because I knew he'd be with me, and I'd be with him, facing whatever came our way, together. On Wednesday evening, it was already dark when I got off work. Winter came early in Manhattan. The streetlights were on by 6, casting a warm glow. As I wrapped my scarf tighter and headed for the subway, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Grayson, working late. "Don't wait up for dinner, I left leftover pasta in the fridge." I smiled at the screen and typed back quickly. "Got it? I'll heat some up and save half for you. Be home by 10, okay?" He was now working as a software engineer at a tech company in Queens, busier than ever, even busier than when he'd been his own boss. But no matter how late he stayed, he always texted to let me know he was safe. Once, he'd only ever said "I'm busy" without explanation. Now, these small changes meant more to me than the secondary card he'd given me back then. When I got back to our small apartment, I opened the door to the faint scent of herbs. Grayson had bought a mint plant for the windowsill the week before, saying it would freshen the air. But I knew the real reason. He remembered how I'd always picked up discarded herb pots back at the shelter. I heated up the pasta, portioned Grayson's share into a thermos, and sliced half a loaf of bread to go with it. Just as I finished cleaning up the kitchen, my phone rang again. It was Lucy, the restaurant manager. "Lexi, can you stop by my office tomorrow when you come in? I've got good news." My stomach dropped. I immediately thought I had done something wrong. I'd been working as a waitress at the Italian restaurant for almost a year, quiet, keeping my head down, enduring difficult customers without complaint. The job let me save a few $100s each month, inching us closer to our goal of buying a small house. The next day, as soon as I arrived at the restaurant, I clutched the hem of my apron and headed to the office. Lucy was sitting behind her desk holding a folder. When she saw me, she smiled. "Lexi, do you know you got the highest customer satisfaction score last month?" I froze, confused. "I what?" "You listen to customers' requests patiently. You even remember the old gentleman who likes extra olives, and the pregnant lady who needs decaf tea," Lucy said, sliding the folder across the desk to me. "I talked to the boss, and starting next month, you're promoted to head waitress. Your salary will go up by $300. How does that sound?" I tightened my grip on my apron, my fingertips tingling. I'd been in New York for 5 years, from fighting for a bed at the shelter to having a steady job and a promotion. I'd never even dared to dream of this. My nose stung, and I quickly wiped my eyes. "Thank you, Lucy. I'll work hard, I promise." That night, when Grayson came home, I told him the news. He was in the middle of taking off his coat. He froze, his eyes lighting up. "Really, Lexi? That's amazing." He pulled me into a hug so tight it made my shoulders ache, but it warmed me to the core. "With your raise and the money we've saved, we might even have enough for a down payment by next spring," he said, burying his face in my neck, his voice muffled. "I used to be the one giving you things, but now you're shining on your own. It's perfect." I patted his back and looked at the mint plant on the windowsill, its leaves bright green. Happiness wasn't about someone giving you everything. It was about two people, step by step, making life brighter together. On Saturday morning, Grayson had a rare day off. We tucked $200 into our pockets and took the subway to the Brooklyn flea market. He wanted to buy me a thick coat. The cheap down jacket I had bought the year before had lost its shape after too many washes. The market was crowded, filled with the sounds of haggling and laughter. The air smelled of hot dogs and caramel apples. Grayson held my hand, walking slowly, stopping to browse old vinyl records at a stall. He'd been a record fanatic once, but had sold his entire collection when he'd gone bankrupt. Now, he liked to hunt for cheap finds here. "What about this one?" He picked up a beige wool coat, checking the collar. The tag still on, looks like it was barely worn. I touched the fabric. It was soft, much warmer than what I was wearing. The vendor, an old lady, smiled. "It was my daughter's. She moved to California last year and didn't want to take it with her. $50, it's a steal." Grayson pulled out his wallet to pay, but I stopped him. "Wait, can you make it cheaper? We want to buy a few other things too." The old lady looked at us, then at the small grocery bag in my hand, which only held a few tomatoes and a loaf of bread. She sighed, "Fine $40. Consider it a little help for you young folks." After paying, I put on the coat. It fit perfectly. Grayson stared at me for a moment, then laughed. "You look like a little squirrel all bundled up." I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help smiling. As we walked on, I suddenly spotted a familiar figure. Martha, someone I'd met at the shelter. She was dunting on the ground, picking up apples people had thrown away. Her hair was even messier than before, and she was still wearing the tattered cotton-padded jacket she'd had back then. My heart tightened. I pulled Grayson over and handed her the bread and tomatoes from my bag. "Martha, long time no see." She looked up, froze when she saw me, then quickly stuffed the apples into her pocket and rubbed her hands. "Lexi, you're doing well now, huh?" "Okay," I said, squatting down and softening my voice. "Is the shelter still crowded? Do you need me to help you find a temporary place to stay?" She shook her head, avoiding my eyes. "No, I'm fine." "You two should go. Don't let me hold you up." I wanted to say more, but Grayson gently tugged my hand and pulled out a $20 bill. "Martha, buy something warm to eat. It's cold out." Martha hesitated, then took the money and mumbled a thank you before grabbing her things and hurrying away. Watching her back, I felt a pang of sadness. I'd once been just like her, scrounging for scraps in the cold, never knowing if I'd survive the next day. "Don't be sad," Grayson said, pulling me to my feet and adjusting the collar of my coat. "Right now, this is all we can do for her. When we're in a better place, we'll help more people." I nodded and squeezed his hand. Sunlight filtered through the gaps between the stalls, warming our feet. In early December, on a weekend, we went to the supermarket to buy a Christmas tree. We were in the produce section when someone called my name. "Lexi." I turned around. It was Lena. She was wearing a faded down jacket, her hair tied back in a ponytail, no makeup on her face. She looked even more haggard than the last time we'd seen her at the supermarket. Her shopping cart held only a bag of rice and 2 bottles of discounted milk, a far cry from the woman who'd once been draped in designer labels. Grayson instinctively pulled me behind him, his tone cold. "What do you want?" Lena's face paled, and her eyes flicked to me before quickly looking away. I just wanted to say sorry. Last time at the supermarket, I shouldn't have bothered you." I froze. I'd never expected her to apologize voluntarily. She'd always been so arrogant, never admitting when she was wrong. "I'm working at a laundromat in Queens now, making $2,000 a month." She said, her voice shaking. "I have to pay rent and take care of my mom. I used to think money could buy everything, but when my mom got sick, I realized some things are more important than cash." Grayson said nothing. I looked at her shopping cart, my feelings mixed. She'd hurt us deeply, but seeing her like this, I couldn't bring myself to say anything cruel. "We have things to do. Let's go," I said, pulling Grayson's hand and heading for the Christmas tree section. A few steps later, Lena's voice called out behind us. "Lexi, Grayson, Merry Christmas." I didn't look back, just squeezed Grayson's hand. Truth was, I'd stopped hating her long ago. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because my life was too good now, too full of happiness to waste time on past grievances. A week before Christmas, we finally had enough for a down payment. We bought a small 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, just over 60 square meters, with a tiny balcony. But when you opened the windows, you could see the park in the distance, and sunlight filled every corner of the living room. On moving day, Grayson dug out his old black suit jacket, the one he'd given me to wear at the wedding. I'd washed it and kept it folded at the bottom of my closet. He held it up and looked at it in the sunlight. "Can't believe I still have this." "Hang it up if you want. Keep it as a memento," I said, handing him a hanger. He hung the jacket on the balcony railing. When the wind blew, the hem fluttered gently. "Lexi," he said, turning to me, "let's get married next spring." I froze, tears suddenly welling up. From meeting him beside a trash can to now having our own small house, it felt like both a lifetime and just yesterday. "Okay," I said, nodding, my voice hoarse. On Christmas Day, we put up a small Christmas tree in the living room. We hung paper stars I'd made by hand lopsided around the edges, but Grayson said they were perfect. That night, we made mulled wine and sat on the couch watching a movie. Snow was falling outside, but the apartment was warm and cozy. "Do you remember what I was eating when we first met?" I asked, leaning my head on Grayson's shoulder and taking a sip of mulled wine. "Of course," he said, smiling and pinching my cheek. "A half-eaten slice of cheese pizza, covered in a little dirt." I remember thinking, how could someone eat that happily out in -5-degree weather? And I remember thinking, this guy's weird, offering $500 to a homeless girl to go to a wedding. I said, smiling too, even as tears fell. He pulled me into his arms and patted my back gently. "I'll never let you eat cold pizza again. Never let you freeze on the street again." I closed my eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar on his clothes and the aroma of mulled wine. The most precious things in life weren't millions of dollars or designer clothes. They were the moments when someone pulled you up when you were at your lowest, then stayed with you to build the life you'd always dreamed of. The next spring, we got married on the lawn of Central Park. There was no fancy venue, no expensive wedding dress. I wore a white dress Grayson had bought for me with half his first paycheck. He wore that old black suit jacket, pressed perfectly flat. Not many guests came, just Grayson's grandma, Lucy from the restaurant, and a few of his co-workers. Grandma held my hand, tears streaming down her face. Lexi, Grayson is so lucky to have met you. The wedding was simple. When the pastor asked if we'd stay together forever, I looked into Grayson's eyes and suddenly remembered the first time I'd seen him. Back then he'd been backlit, cold as ice. But now, his eyes were filled with nothing but warmth and me. I do, I said, my voice steady. Grayson took my hand. The warmth of his palm seeped through the silver ring he'd given me, the same ring he still wore, saying he'd keep it on forever. I do, he said, his voice shaking but clear. After the ceremony, Lucy handed us a cake she'd made herself, with Lexi and Grayson written in chocolate. We sat on the lawn, eating cake, watching kids fly kites in the distance. The wind carried the scent of spring flowers. Should we have a kid someday? Grayson asked suddenly. Sure, I said, smiling. A little girl, with eyes as beautiful as yours. What if it's a boy? He pinched my nose. Then we'll teach him to cherish every hot meal, every warm coat just like I did, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder and watching the kite soar higher into the sky. The sun warmed our faces, making me feel sleepy. I remembered that winter day in -5 degrees, thinking I'd never see spring again. But now, spring was right beside me in my hands, in Grayson's eyes. Life never stayed bad forever. As long as you didn't give up, someone would always come along with light, turning your winter into spring. On a Saturday morning in May, sunlight was just creeping onto the balcony when the doorbell rang sharp and urgent. I was frying bacon when Grayson wiped his hands and went to answer it. A second later, his voice came sharp with shock. FBI, we haven't done anything illegal. The spatula slipped from my hand and clattered onto the stove. I ran over to see two men in black suits standing at the door, their badges glinting so brightly they hurt my eyes. Mr. Grayson Bell, one of them said, pulling out a document. You're accused of embezzling company funds and forging financial statements 3 years ago. Please come with us to cooperate with the investigation. Grayson's face turned ashen. He instinctively pulled me behind him. That's impossible. The company went bankrupt because Lena leaked confidential information. All the accounts were public. We have a witness who provided new evidence, the other man said, holding up a photo of a signed document with Grayson's name on it. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll take you into custody by force. I grabbed Grayson's hand. His palms were soaked with sweat. Wait a minute, I said, staring at the two men, my voice steadier than I felt. He has the right to call a lawyer. That's his legal right. The FBI agents exchanged glances, then nodded. Grayson's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and called the lawyer who'd handled his bankruptcy. I kept my eyes on the file bag by the door. I could make out the name Thomas Lane on it. Thomas had been Grayson's former business partner, who had vanished with the down payment when the company collapsed. Before the lawyer arrived, Grayson squatted beside the couch, his head in his hands. It's Thomas, he said, his voice muffled. He's been holding a grudge since back then. Now he's taking advantage of this to ruin me. I squatted down and rested his head on my shoulder. Don't panic. We have evidence. The confidential documents Lena leaked had Thomas's transfer records. We still have the backups. He lifted his head suddenly, his eyes lighting up. Right there, in the old box on the balcony. You insisted we keep them just in case when we moved last year. But before we could retrieve the evidence, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Martha. Her hair was disheveled, her face marked with a slap. She burst in crying and threw herself at me. Lexi, I'm sorry. They forced me to sign a false statement. They said if I didn't testify against Grayson, they'd send me back to rehab. My blood ran cold. So Martha was the witness. She'd been arrested for drug use the year before, and now someone was using that against her. Who forced you? I asked, holding her shoulders. Was it Thomas Lane? Martha nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face, leaving streaks in the dirt on her cheeks. It was his men. They said if I testified in court that Grayson embezzled funds, they'd pay off my drug debts. I had no choice. I didn't want to go back to rehab. Grayson clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white. That bastard, he even preys on homeless people. When the lawyer arrived, he reviewed the transfer records we had. He frowned and said, these can prove Thomas is guilty, but to clear Grayson's name, Martha needs to recant her testimony in court. We need to find Thomas himself. At the mention of recanting, Martha trembled. But they said if I take back my statement, they'll hurt my little sister. She's still in the orphanage. My heart sank. Thomas had covered all his bases. Grayson squeezed my hand, but his eyes were determined. We won't let anything happen to you or your sister. Lexi, do you remember old George from the Brooklyn shelter? He knows a lot of people. He might be able to find Thomas. Of course I remembered old George. He'd been in a gang once, then turned his life around and opened the shelter. He had connections everywhere. I pulled out my phone and called him immediately. My hands were shaking when I said, "Mr. George, please, we need your help." Old George came through. He said Thomas was hiding in an abandoned warehouse in Queens, trying to transfer a sum of dirty money. That night, we had the lawyer take Martha to the police station to apply for witness protection. Grayson and I followed old George's men to the warehouse. The warehouse was pitch black, with only a few emergency lights flickering. The air smelled of rust and mildew. We'd just reached the second floor when we heard Thomas's voice. "Bell will never see this coming. He'll be stuck with the embezzlement charge for the rest of his life. Why are you doing this?" Grayson pushed open the door, his voice cold as ice. Thomas turned around, froze when he saw us, then laughed. He twirled a switchblade in his hand. "Well, look who's here." "Grayson, you think your company went under because of Lena?" "Wrong. I leaked the confidential information to her and made her think it was revenge against you. I've wanted to take over your company from the start." I clutched the voice recorder old George had given me hidden in my pocket and inched toward the side. "Aren't you afraid we'll hand over the transfer records to the police?" "Records?" Thomas scoffed. "Who's going to believe you?" Martha signed the testimony. "The FBI has evidence. Do you think a judge will believe a homeless girl and a bankrupt businessman?" Grayson took a step forward. His fists clenched so tight they creaked. "What did you do to Martha's sister?" "Relax, if she testifies nicely, I'll make sure her sister lives well in the orphanage," Thomas said, waving the switchblade. "But if you try anything, I'll make sure those two never see each other again." Just then, police sirens wailed outside the warehouse. Thomas's face paled. He turned and tried to jump out the window, but Grayson grabbed his arm. The two men scuffled. I rushed over, picked up the switchblade, and threw it far away, but Thomas kicked me in the stomach, making me double over in pain. "Lexi." Grayson's eyes turned red. He punched Thomas in the face, pinning him to the ground. When the police burst in, Thomas was still yelling, "You won't get away with this. I have accomplices." I pulled myself up using the wall and felt for the voice recorder in my pocket. It had captured every word. Grayson walked over and hugged me, his voice shaking. "Are you okay? Does it hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, leaning into his arms and watching as the police led Thomas away. We won. After Jack was arrested, we went to visit Thomas in prison. Through the thick glass, he was wearing a prison uniform, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were still cold and calculating. "Why are you targeting us?" Grayson stared at him. "You stole money when the company went bankrupt. Wasn't that enough? Now you're trying to hurt my daughter?" Thomas laughed, tapping his finger on the glass. "I'm not the one hurting you. You are. Did you really think you built your company so quickly by accident? It's because of your father, your deadbeat dad. Back in the day, he ran guns with my dad. The first investment for your company? It was dirty money from their old racket." Grayson and I froze. Grayson's dad had died when he was 10, and he'd always thought his father was just a regular truck driver. He'd never heard anything about gun running. "You're lying." Grayson's voice shook. "My dad wasn't like that." "I'm not lying," Thomas said, pulling a photo out of his pocket and holding it up to the glass. It showed two young men. One was Grayson's dad, the other Thomas's dad, both holding guns, standing in front of a warehouse. They fell out over the money. "Your dad took off with the cash, and my dad spent his whole life looking for him. When I saw you start your company, I wanted to take back what was mine. Too bad Lena was too stupid to finish the job." So Thomas had ruined Grayson's company not just for money, but to get revenge for an old grudge against Grayson's father. I squeezed Grayson's hand. His palm was ice cold, his face ashen. "I never touched that dirty money," Grayson said, his voice soft but steady. "After my dad died, I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. The money to start my company came from my savings, not some dirty cash. What my dad did has nothing to do with me, and nothing to do with my daughter." Thomas stared at him for a long time, then laughed a bitter, hollow laugh. "I know. I checked later. Your dad donated the money to an orphanage, the same one Martha's sister was in. I hated you for so many years, and I hated the wrong person." When we walked out of the prison, the sun was blinding. Grayson squatted down on the sidewalk, his hands in his hair, his shoulders shaking. I sat down beside him and put Ruby's stuffed rabbit in his hand. "Don't be sad. You did nothing wrong. Your dad donated the money, and you helped Martha and her sister. That's all that matters." He looked up at me, his eyes red. "I always thought my dad was just an ordinary guy. Now I find out he had all these secrets, but in the end, he chose to be good, right?" "Yes," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, "just like you. No matter what happened, you never lost your kindness." At the end of the year, I found out I was pregnant. When I got home with the ultrasound report, Grayson was hanging laundry on the balcony. The old black suit jacket was still hanging in the most visible spot, now next to a tiny baby onesie. "Grayson," I said, walking over and handing him the report, my voice shaking. "We're going to have a baby." He took the report and stared at it for a long time. Then he squatted down and burst into tears. I patted his back, crying too. We'd both thought we'd never have this kind of happiness, a warm home, a baby on the way, and each other. Our daughter was born the next spring. She had Grayson's bright eyes, and we named her Ruby because when she was born, the dogwoods outside the window were in bloom, red as rubies. On the day we left the hospital, old George and Martha came to visit. Martha held Ruby, beaming. "She's so cute, like a little son." Martha was now a nurse at the community hospital. Her sister had been adopted, and she came to our house every weekend. Lena sent a gift to a hand-knitted baby sweater with a note inside. "Congratulations on Ruby's birth. May she grow up to be someone who brings light to others." I was thinking, what if I hadn't said yes that day? I said, squeezing his hand. I'd probably still be on the streets, wondering if I'd survive the winter. He pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on my head. "There's no what if, Lexi. From that day on, our fates were tied together. You made me realize that the things money can't buy are the most precious. Like how you stayed with me when I was bankrupt. How you stood up to the FBI when I was framed. How we have Ruby now. A real family." Ruby stirred in her crib, letting out a soft coo. Grayson hurried over and patted her back gently. Moonlight streamed through the window, gilding him and the baby in silver. I walked to the balcony and looked at the black suit jacket. The wind blew, and its hem fluttered. The streetlights below were on, like stars fallen to earth. I remembered how I'd stared at those streetlights from the shelter window, wondering where my own light was. Now I knew. My light wasn't from the streetlights or from the money and house someone had given me. It was from Grayson's hand, from Ruby's eyes, from all the hard but steady days we'd spent together. When Ruby was 3, we enrolled her in a community preschool in Brooklyn. September mornings were always misty. That day, I pushed her pink stroller as usual, walked her to the gate, and watched her run into the classroom holding her stuffed rabbit. Then I headed to the restaurant for work. Around 10 o'clock, my phone started ringing. Non-stop, it was the preschool teacher, her voice shaking like a leaf. "Ms. Lexi. Ruby's gone." The security camera was smashed, and the guard said a man in a black hoodie came by. "He said you sent him to pick her up." The tray in my hand clattered to the floor, spilling spaghetti everywhere. "What did you say?" I grabbed the phone and ran outside, my nails digging into my palms so hard it hurt. "I never sent anyone. How could you let a stranger take her?" On the taxi ride to the preschool, I called Grayson. He was fixing code at work. When he heard Ruby's gone, his voice cracked. "I'll be right there." "Don't panic, call old George. He has connections in the neighborhood." When I arrived at the preschool, police cars were swarming outside. Ruby's stroller was sitting alone by the flower bed, her stuffed rabbit lying on the ground beside the wheels, covered in dirt. I ran over and picked up the rabbit. It still smelled like the milk Ruby had spilled on it that morning. Tears poured down my face. Lexi, Grayson arrived, out of breath, holding a piece of paper. The guard found this in the trash. It's a ransom note. The note was printed in smudged ink. "Want your daughter back? Don't call the police. Bring $500,000 in cash to the abandoned cannery in Queens at 8 p.m. Come alone, try anything, and you'll find her body at Thomas's men, Thomas's accomplices." Grayson punched the wall, his knuckles bleeding. I knew that bastard wasn't finished. He said he had accomplices back then, but I never followed up. I clutched the note, my hands shaking, but suddenly calm. Back when I'd lived on the streets, I dealt with plenty of blackmailers. Panic only made things worse. "We don't have $500,000, I said, tucking the rabbit into my bag. "And they want me to go alone. They'll probably kidnap me too." "I'm going with you," Grayson said, grabbing my hand. No room for argument. I already called old George. He said his old crew is watching the cannery area. The lawyer contacted the FBI. They'll stake out the place, but they can't get too close. They don't want to provoke the kidnappers. We emptied our savings and borrowed $100,000 from old George, finally scraping together $500,000 in cash. We stuffed it into a black backpack. Before leaving, I put Ruby's stuffed rabbit in the bag and tucked a folding knife into my pocket. Told George had given it to me that morning, saying, "A girl who's lived on the streets needs something to defend herself with." As we drove to Queens, the sky grew dark, and streetlights flickered on one by one, just like the ones I'd stared at from the shelter window. If something happens to Ruby," Grayson said, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, "I'll never forgive myself." "Nothing will happen to her," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, even though I wasn't sure. "Ruby's smart. She'll wait for us." The cannery had long been abandoned. The iron gate was rusted through. When we pushed it open, it squeaked loudly, echoing in the night. Inside, It was pitch black, with only a few emergency lights casting cold light on the metal cans. I'm here. I have the money. I held the backpack above my head and walked forward slowly. Grayson was hiding behind a shipping container outside, his phone in hand, ready to send the location to the FBI. When I reached the center of the warehouse, a man stepped out of the shadows and pulled down his hood. It was a man with a scar across his face and a mole under his left eye. Old George had mentioned him. He was Jack Thomas's right-hand man. Put the money down. Where's the kid? I stared at him, not seeing Ruby anywhere. Jack laughed, revealing yellowed teeth. Anxious, are we? First hand over the money. He reached for the backpack, but I stepped back. Let me see Ruby first. Otherwise, I'll throw the money on the ground. Neither of us gets it. I knew men like him greedy and cowardly. Jack hesitated, then yelled into the shadows. Bring the kid out. Two thugs pushed a small pink chair forward. Ruby was sitting on it, her mouth taped shut. Her eyes were red, but when she saw me, she struggled to jump off the chair, making muffled sounds. Ruby. My heart ached. I rushed over to tear the tape off her mouth, then picked her up and ran toward the ventilation duct I'd noticed when I walked in. Grayson. Now. Jack realized what was happening and pulled out a gun. Stop them. Just then, police sirens wailed outside. Grayson led the FBI agents in, and old George's men rushed in from the back door, carrying steel pipes. They surrounded the thugs in an instant. Jack, you're surrounded. Grayson stood in front of Ruby and me, his voice cold as ice. Jack panicked. He grabbed one of his men and held him hostage, backing toward the corner. Don't come any closer or I'll kill him. When he reached the wall, he kicked open a metal cabinet. Inside was a bomb, its red timer counting down. 0:59. Haha. Think you won? Jack laughed maniacally. This bomb will blow the whole warehouse sky high. We're all going to die. I held Ruby tightly and ducked behind a shipping container. Grayson threw his arms around us and covered our ears. The FBI's bomb disposal expert rushed over, his fingers flying as he cut the wires. When the timer hit 0:10, he finally cut the red wire. The timer beeped and went dark. Jack collapsed to the ground. When the police cuffed him, he was still yelling, Thomas will never let you go. I held Ruby in my arms. She cried and called out Mommy, her little body shaking. Grayson squatted down and pulled both of us into his arms, his voice shaking. It's okay, Ruby. Daddy and Mommy are here. After Jack was arrested, we went to visit Thomas in prison. Through the thick glass, he was wearing a prison uniform, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were still cold and calculating. Why are you targeting us? Grayson stared at him. You stole money when the company went bankrupt. Wasn't that enough? Now you're trying to hurt my daughter. Thomas laughed, tapping his finger on the glass. I'm not the one hurting you. Oh, you are. Did you really think you built your company so quickly by accident? It's because of your father you're a deadbeat dad. Back in the day, he ran guns with my dad. The first investment for your company, it was dirty money from their old racket. Grayson and I froze. Grayson's dad had died when he was 10, and he'd always thought his father was just a regular truck driver. He'd never heard anything about gun running. You're lying? Grayson's voice shook. My dad wasn't like that. I'm not lying, Thomas said, pulling a photo out of his pocket and holding it up to the glass. It showed two young men. One was Grayson's dad, the other Thomas's dad, both holding guns, standing in front of a warehouse. They fell out over the money. Your dad took off with the cash, and my dad spent his whole life looking for him. When I saw you start your company, I wanted to take back what was mine. Too bad Lena was too stupid to finish the job. So Thomas had ruined Grayson's company, not just for money, but to get revenge for an old grudge against Grayson's father. I squeezed Grayson's hand. His palm was ice cold, his face ashen. I never touched that dirty money, Grayson said, his voice soft but steady. After my dad died, I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. The money to start my company came from my savings, not some dirty cash. What my dad did has nothing to do with me, and nothing to do with my daughter. Thomas stared at him for a long time, then laughed a bitter, hollow laugh. I know, I checked later. Your dad donated the money to an orphanage, the same one Martha's sister was in. I hated you for so many years. And I hated the wrong person. When we walked out of the prison, the sun was blinding. Grayson squatted down on the sidewalk, his hands in his hair, his shoulders shaking. I sat down beside him and put Ruby's stuffed rabbit in his hand. Don't be sad. You did nothing wrong. Your dad donated the money, and you helped Martha and her sister. That's all that matters. He looked up at me, his eyes red. I always thought my dad was just an ordinary guy. Now I find out he had all these secrets. But in the end, he chose to be good, right? Yes, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. Just like you. No matter what happened, you never lost your kindness. By the end of the year, we'd moved into a new home, a small house in the Brooklyn suburbs with a tiny yard. Ruby had planted a young Christmas tree there, a gift from her preschool teacher. She declared she wanted to watch the tree grow right alongside her. On Christmas Eve, old George, Martha, and her little sister all came over. Martha was now the head nurse at the community hospital. Her sister, who'd been adopted, was in elementary school. With pigtails just like Ruby's, the two girls ran around the living room, clutching their stuffed toys, their laughter ringing out like wind chimes. Lena showed up too, carrying a cake she'd baked herself. On top, she'd piped cream into the shape of a family of 4 Grayson, me, Ruby, and a tiny baby boy. His name's Thomas, she said, smiling softly. Not after that, Thomas, after the lesson he taught me. I want to be a good mom now. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow over the room. Our family photo hung on the Christmas tree we'd taken it the month before, with Ruby sitting between Grayson and me, holding her stuffed rabbit tight and grinning so wide her 2 front baby teeth showed. Lexi, do you remember that red dress I got you when we first met? Grayson suddenly said. He pulled a box from the closet and opened it. Inside was a new red dress, made of soft silk, nearly identical to the one from the wedding, but with a few tiny, playful details. I had a designer make it. This time, I got one for you and one for Ruby. Ruby darted over, her eyes lighting up as she held up the smaller dress. Mommy, it's just like yours. We can be twins. She twirled around, the fabric swirling like a little red cloud. I took the dress in my hands, the silk smooth against my fingers. Tears pricked my eyes. All I could think of was that freezing day on Fifth Avenue, when a stranger in a tailored suit had handed me a similar dress, changing everything. Old George sipped his mulled wine, chuckling. Back when I first met you, kiddo, you were digging through trash cans with a ferocity. Never would have guessed you'd end up here, surrounded by all this. He nodded at the room, at the laughter, the cake, the tree strung with paper stars Ruby had made. Martha smiled too, passing Ruby a plate of cookies. If it weren't for you and Grayson, I'd still be scavenging for apples in alleyways. You gave me a chance to turn my life around. Ruby climbed onto my lap, holding up her red dress again. Mommy, why's the dress red? Miss Lily said red is for hearts and Christmas. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, glancing at Grayson. His eyes were soft, the same way they'd been that night he'd draped his suit jacket over my shoulders in the Hamptons. Red's the color of the sun on cold days, I told her. It's the color that turns winter into spring, just like how we turned hard days into happy ones, together. Grayson sat down beside us, wrapping an arm around both of us. It's the color of second chances, he added, glancing at Lena. She met his gaze and nodded, a quiet, grateful smile on her face. Outside, snowflakes started to fall, drifting down onto the yard and dusting the top of Ruby's little Christmas tree. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon and sugar, and the sound of carols played softly from the radio. I looked around the room, mad old George, who'd gone from a gruff shelter owner to a grandpa to Ruby. At Martha, who'd turned her pain into purpose by helping others. At Lena, who'd traded arrogance for humility and was building a better life for her son. And then at Grayson, holding Ruby's hand as she tried to hang another star on the tree. His face lit up with a joy I'd never seen in him back when he was a millionaire. For a moment, I thought of that Huffington cheese pizza I'd been clutching in -5-degree weather. I thought of the shelter's cold floors, the fear of never having a place to call home. But then Ruby tugged on my hand, holding up her red dress. Mommy, let's put them on. Let's dance. Grayson stood up, offering me his hand. Come on, let's give her a show. As we danced around the living room, Ruby twirling in her tiny red dress, Grayson humming off-key, the others clapping, I realized something. The drama of our lives hadn't come from $1,000,000 deals or fancy weddings. It had come from the quiet, brave choices. To trust a stranger. To stay when everything fell apart. To forgive, even if not forget. To turn pain into kindness. The Christmas tree's lights flickered, catching on the family photos. In it, our smiles were bright. No designer clothes, no mansion, just us. And that's what mattered. Later, as Ruby drifted off to sleep on the couch, still clutching her red dress, Grayson wrapped his arms around me. You know, he whispered, kissing my forehead, that dress was never just a dress. It was me trying to say, I saw you even when you thought no one did. I leaned into him, listening to the snowfall outside and the quiet hum of our family in the next room. I saw you too, I said, even when you were pretending to be cold as ice. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. Old George started telling a story about his when young, running a bakery in Brooklyn. And Lena laughed. Genuine, unguarded. Ruby stirred, mumbling something about red dresses in spring. And in that moment I knew the best kind of magic wasn't the kind that came with money. It was the kind that turned a broken people from different worlds into a family. It was the kind that made a red dress mean not just survival, but love, warm, steady, and always there, even when the snow fell and the days got cold.